All right. Well, welcome to Chasing Squirrels. So excited to be back in season 2. We're now on episode 6 already. And we have been answering questions that we got from the congregation
that we have
back in the spring. And so that's what we're doing here this fall. And it is my turn to pick a question.
Woo!
And I'm going to pick why the mud in the eyes when Jesus knew it would irritate the religious establishment.
Fun.
So this is a specific question about a specific thing that Jesus did in healing a man who was born blind. He spit and made some mud and put it on the guy's eyes. And this had ramifications in the culture. So I want to read the story so we all know what we're talking about.
Sounds good.
And the question is, why would Jesus intentionally irritate the religious establishment? Because he did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Why would he do that? So we're going to read a pretty good chunk of chapter 9 here of the Gospel of John, this story of the healing of a man born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" That's an interesting statement right there. They were operating under the assumption that any sort of physical problem was the result of sin, either the sin of the person that they committed before being born, which is not something fits into our culture right now. We don't think thoughts like that, or the parents.
And that was the disciples asking.
Yeah, that's the disciples.
So
this was
the Pharisees,
not the bad guys or something, right? It just was part of the
to call bad guys Pharisees.
Part of the culture. Yeah, I think they're the bad guys. I don't know. They're about to be here in this chapter.
Spoiler.
Yeah, but I mean, Jesus had to straighten out a lot of religious dysfunction.
Yeah,
we see it with the disciples here in these verses. So that's where we pick it up. Verse 3, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. That's amazing.
It's translated scent, not SCENT.
Right.
Translated
like it smells good.
No, it's translated scent, right?
Oh, SENT.
Yeah.
That means to go?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. See, I listen to the Bible more than I read it, so I just learned something.
Yeah. So if it's like scent,
go.
is like you have a nice scent, you have a nice aroma.
Yeah.
But like it's translated scent, the pool of scent. So he sent him. Or like
That's what it's called?
It's called, yeah.
Wash in the pool of scent. Like
he was sent.
He really sent that one. Yeah.
He just sent her, bud.
Yeah. Send it. That's bizarre.
Yeah.
I always thought it smelled good. See,
well,
look at that.
maybe, I guess.
It might have also done that, but that's not what it's talking about in the Bible. It's talking about, he says go, which he sends him to the pool of
scent.
Being sent.
Yeah.
No, I don't even, that's a lot of stuff there. I got to let that roll around up there for a while. Okay, yeah, scent. And my spelling isn't very good anyway, so I can't tell the difference between the words, but
autocorrect word spelling for me.
Yeah. So he was sent to the pool of scent, and he went and he washed and he came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he just looks like him." But he himself insisted, "It's me." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath.
Ooh.
Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What do you have to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, "He is a prophet." They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that he now can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know that he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself."
Hey.
So they just didn't want any part of that. And that's something that you'll see in dysfunctional religious culture is like if you give the wrong answer to a question or you have the wrong perspective, it can be very dangerous and you can be very much in trouble with that culture. And so they knew that they're walking into a hornet's nest. They don't want to deal with it. So they're like, we'll throw our son under the bus. We're not going to have any part of it.
Ooh.
Verse 22, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That is why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied,
Manipulation.
Yeah, I know. Like, let's tell you what you should think and force you into it. He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple." I love that insult. "You're his disciple."
You bad, awesome person.
Yeah. Says, "You are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out.
Ooh, embarrassment is not fun.
Yeah. So this
could answer another question in this too.
Well, there's a whole bunch of questions in that. Which one is that as we chase that squirrel?
I'm talking about one of the questions that were asked.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to that one later.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this is a good preliminary to that one.
Mm-hmm.
But we see here that, Jesus clearly could have done this on a different day.
Mm-hmm.
The guy was born blind. He's now an adult. There's lots of opportunity. And Jesus, he is straightening out a dysfunction of the disciples.
Yeah.
Who sinned. They weren't even wondering if this was a result of sin or just an unfortunate situation.
Right,
They
right.
knew somebody had sinned.
Yep.
Maybe the preborn sinned, and so he's born blind for some sort of in utero sin. I don't even know.
How is that possible?
What was their thought process? I don't even know how, I can't picture how they would consider that to be an option.
I don't know.
Sometimes you understand what someone's thinking and you disagree. Other times you can't understand what they're thinking. And I think in our way of seeing the world, we don't understand the possibility of being born blind because of your own sin. How does that even happen?
Right.
It's just not something that I have the tools to be able to put together. So then you got to blame the parents. Now, of course, we did see that the Pharisees, said you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they throw him out. So they're saying, hey, you're born blind because of your own sin, or whatever, when you were born, so they're blaming him and using that, which is just yucky stuff.
Oh, terrible.
So Jesus is straightening that out, but he also, on several occasions, does things to irritate the religious establishment when he does things on the Sabbath. So he specifically does this on the Sabbath and by making mud.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, Jesus will just say something.
Right.
He had to do something.
Yeah, Lazarus, come out.
Mm-hmm.
In order to really effectively break the Sabbath, he's like, I'm going to make some mud. And I'm going to stick it on this guy's eyes and I'm going to tell him to go wash, which I don't know if that was against the rules too, but he's specifically making sure.
They were only allowed to take a certain amount of steps a day.
Right.
Like that was a
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
had
A Sabbath
a
day's
lot.
walk.
Yeah, and
was
they could only lift a hammer like so high and stuff like that.
right. Yeah. There's
There
a
was
bunch of
a lot of random rules. So I think there was a lot of things that he did, not just the making of the dirt. Again, this is a hypothesis, but I'm assuming there's a lot more to breaking Sabbath rules, quote unquote, that Jesus did.
Yeah.
In that moment.
I'm sure. And the reality is once you start getting so hyper specific that it becomes about all of these little rules, you're going to miss the heart of God.
100%.
And so, I heard all of these different Sabbath things like, you couldn't write on the Sabbath. That was considered to be, working. So you couldn't write anything. But then what if your heel kicked in the dirt while you were walking and it made a line, and that's like the letter I, like, have you now broken the Sabbath because you made an I,
Yeah.
So they came up with a rule that you can make up to 3 letters accidentally as long as they don't form a word, then you haven't broke the Sabbath,
Yeah.
Oh my.
And so
They were intense.
they had and there was gazillions of these rules.
Yep.
And just as Jesus was going to use this man born blind to straighten out something that the disciples had wrong in their understanding, he's also going to use this as an opportunity to expose some religious dysfunction that's going on in the culture.
Right.
Yeah.
And he is absolutely not interested in avoiding confrontation with the religious establishment. One of the things in the question, why the mud in the eyes when Jesus knew it would irritate the religious establishment, is kind of an assumption that irritating the religious establishment is not a good thing.
Ooh.
Like, why would he do that if it's going to irritate people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, is that a bad thing?
No.
It depends on why you irritate the religious establishment. One of the very, very core things about Jesus was that he was about people making a connection with their heavenly Father way more than people following the rules of religion, because they had gotten into a culture of religious rules and they were forgetting about their relationship with God.
Right.
And so Jesus has to straighten that out. He's trying to show who God is, and he's going to do that by, breaking the Sabbath rules, not breaking the Sabbath, but breaking the Sabbath rules.
Right.
And he did that on a number of occasions. They were picking the heads of grain on the Sabbath, and, so they're basically harvesting on the Sabbath. He healed the man with the shriveled hand at the church on the Sabbath. He does this on the Sabbath. There were many examples of Jesus irritating the religious establishment by doing things on the Sabbath. So why would he do that? What's the reason?
I think there's always like multiple answers for the reason why Jesus does something, because like, I don't know. I feel like he knew obviously he knew his time was short, right?
Sure.
And so like, he knew like, if I answer this question, it has to be like an answer to hundreds of other questions, right? And that's probably why he spoke in parables, I'm assuming. But like, I think there was, first off, like you said, the disciples, disturbing the religious establishment, but also for us now to realize like what the Sabbath really is.
Absolutely.
It's not this thing that we are forced to do to somehow make God greater in that moment.
Yeah.
The Sabbath is created for us.
Yeah. We could pull in another question that we have here on our list is, how do you keep the Sabbath holy? Should I not have chores on that day? I think we can answer both of these questions at the same time, because the religious establishment had distorted what the Sabbath was.
Right.
And Jesus is trying to expose that distortion, help people realize that they can grab hold of, that the real relationship with God and the real way of following God, rather than just a bunch of goofy religious rules that don't get you anywhere. And the Sabbath, I think, was probably one of the most obvious examples of that.
Right.
Where, that you can walk a certain distance. Well, how far should you go? I don't know. You can't write stuff down. There were just a billion different rules about breaking the Sabbath. And what I see the Sabbath as being about is really two things. It's about rest from your daily grind, and it's about taking time to build your relationship with God.
Right.
So,
and that's like period. That's what it is.
That's what it is. Rest and build your relationship with God.
Right.
And instead of that, Sabbath had become a religious hassle. And it wasn't restful when you have all these rules and it's
because you're constantly thinking about messing up. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this wrong.
Right. It's punitive. And the only thing you can do is get in trouble.
Right.
That's toxic religion is like, I'm just worried about getting in trouble. Like, what a non-life-giving disaster.
Right. Well, and I've heard, and maybe other people have heard this quote too, but we were not created for, wait, how would I say it?
We can go to
Mark 2:27.
Yeah, we can go to Mark.
You can just quote it that way.
Yeah.
If you have it right there, you can.
Oh, I don't. I just had the reference.
I will have it very shortly. Mark chapter 2.
I'll just let them quote it because
we got a few different spots where Jesus is talking about the Sabbath directly. And in Mark 2:23 through 27, it says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples, as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to them, look, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? He answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.
So that gives us those verses give us the excuse and reason to say, like, we can take a Sabbath.
Right. What's the point of the Sabbath?
It's to rest and build your relationship with God.
Is to help us.
Right. It's not made for us to help God in that moment.
Right.
God was like, hey, I'm going to create something that you have so that you can rest.
It's not really, it's not a service we do to God.
No, it's almost the opposite. It's like he does for us.
Yeah. He requires us to have proper boundaries and take care of ourselves.
Right. And that's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And if you do that, like, burnout is almost impossible.
Right. Yeah.
Almost, I say. But like Gabby and I used to, I mean, we need to do this again, but we used to take like Fridays off. Like, and that would be a day, like, if we don't answer a phone call, like, don't feel bad. It's because this is our day off. We probably should start doing that again. But like, I had at the youth pastor's retreat, Pastor John, I think his last name was Brown, was there, and he spoke, and he said that he had something set up on his phone so that whenever anyone would text him, like on the day that he would have off, it would text him and say, hey, I'm taking a Sabbath. I'll get back to you tomorrow.
Yeah,
and like,
it's nice.
He said people were like healed almost because of that text, because they're like, what? Like, he's taking a day off and intentionally taking it off? Like, and I understand, like, people have busy schedules and people have things, but like, if you can take 24 hours a week just to rest, and like, even if that means sleep, if that means pray, if that means spend time with your wife or your husband or your kids, like those things, like if you can devote that, I can guarantee a lot of the problems will either go away or become a lot easier in your life.
And that goes back to, what does a life of following Christ look like? And I would say it's healthy and life-giving and, wise. It isn't a life of being on the edge and about to fall apart. And if we don't have margin, if we don't have rest, if we don't have times of making sure we're cultivating our relationship with God, then our peace is going to run away. Right. Our connection with God is going to run away. We're going to not be able to sleep, and we're going to end up all frazzled. And then then that's when, say, pastors go into some crazy thing. Like they're all burned out, and then they scream at somebody, or whatever, they end up making the big mistake. And that's not where you want to be. You want to be at a healthy place where you can handle the things that are going on. And that means that having the proper margin and it's built in to God's plan is a day off every week to just let it all go and focus on who God is.
Because there's always going to be a million things you got to do. There's
and they'll be there tomorrow.
Exactly. Somebody told me that one time, like, oh yeah, well your list will be there when you get back.
Right. And like it's not the excuse to not do things.
Right.
Like
exactly.
It's just like you take a day to make sure you can relax. Because actually, Pastor John said this. He said, you can do a lot more in 6 days than you can in 7. And
Exactly.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he's like, if you can take 1 day off to rest, you can be a lot more effective in 6 days than you can in 7 days without resting.
I've had a lot of days like that where I've tried to push through and I know I'm at about 30% effectiveness. Like I could have got all of this done in 3 hours if I was properly rested, but it took me 12.
Yeah.
And it's
better just to put it off and rest.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can get trapped in that spot.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we feel trapped, like doing things God's way is not really possible. But then when you actually do it God's way, you find out that it works better.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, who'd ever thunk?
And I think like taking the Sabbath is still part of like the seek first the kingdom.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you're taking a step back to take the Sabbath.
Right.
You're like taking a step forward in your relationship with God, and resting is almost like a pushing forward in a way versus like stepping back. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm always like in a let's move forward mindset. Right. And so like when you take rest, like you're talking like, say that was 12 hours that you were working on something that normally would take you 3 hours. Say you took those 6 hours to rest or something like that. You probably could have been a little bit more effective. Yeah. Or like you could have, if you would have taken 24 hours, you would still get that done in 3 hours, but the next day.
Right. Yeah.
And the only thing you lost is nothing. Like,
exactly.
And so like just, if it's any advice for anyone listening, try to find a way to take a Sabbath.
Yeah.
And watch what happens.
And if you're doing nothing all the time, try to find a way to work 6 days a week.
Sure.
Sure. I heard one time a preacher had come and preached he was a guest, or he was at a district conference or something. Okay. I can't remember the context, but preached the message on taking your rest and proper boundaries and taking care of yourself. And then whoever it was that was in charge of the group or something said that was a really great message for about 70% of the people that were here.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
But the other 30 need to be kicked in the pants and tell them to get to work,
Sure.
So there are the ones who are working too hard, who are like, even in ministry, you can lose your relationship with God because you're too busy serving God to spend time with God.
Ooh, that's a good point.
And I've walked into that, and that's it's ridiculous. Like, you can't give out what you don't have.
Right. And we try to justify it by like, I'm doing good works, I'm doing good things.
And it's so important.
I'm a pastor, so I should I should do more things to make myself burn out. 100% false.
Yeah, exactly. Let's work hard. Let's lean into this.
Right.
Let's fight the good fight. And then let's take a Sabbath, which, go ahead, Kayla, while I look something up.
Okay. Hey. One of the things, because like part of that question was, should I have chores on that day? Which I think is kind of getting at like the very specifics or like the details of what a Sabbath should look like. But I think like the main thing we've been talking about with the Sabbath is the heart behind the Sabbath is the most important, not the specific thing that you do or don't do.
Right.
Sure.
It is the main point is for you to rest and for you to connect with God. That is the biggest thing. And, like I think my Sabbath days or whatever, I probably still do some chores, but it's like, like, I don't know, are those chores stressing you out? Is it one of those things on your to-do list that are weighing you down and exhausting you? But I've also had those days where I'm like, man, I'm so excited to like
do nothing.
Yeah, do nothing. Or I'm like, I'm going to put a show on, I'm going to fold my laundry, I'm going to put it away, and I'm going to be set for the next day. And like that to me is like restful, but or is it like, oh my gosh, I got to do this. And then when I'm done, I got to do that. And like, this is my only day off and I got to do that. Like that's not a Sabbath, right?
Right.
And so it's like, you got to assess, my Sabbath is going to look different from yours.
Yeah, it's good to recognize that we have freedom.
Yeah.
What is
100%.
restful?
Mm-hmm.
And
Maybe
that's
going on a hike is restful for some people.
right.
Mhm.
For me, I don't know.
For me, going on a hike is fantastically restful.
If it's an easy hike.
Yeah, easy hike.
If it's like, let me climb rocks, hard pass.
Love
Oh,
rocks.
that's so good.
That's a
But
negative
I
word.
think that's part of the whole idea of, walking in the Spirit and not being bound by the law. It isn't trying to figure out how do we follow a bunch of ridiculous rules.
Right.
It's how do we catch the heart of God? And if the heart of
Right.
God is rest and connection with Him, then what is rest? If it's folding your laundry,
Sure.
that's great.
Yeah.
If you're going to sit there the whole time going, oh man, my laundry.
Right.
Right.
Just fold it.
Move on.
Move on with your life.
Right.
Relax.
Yeah.
Life is good. One of the big questions people will ask is, does the Sabbath actually apply to us today? Or was that an Old Testament thing that's
Sure.
gone now? And what I've seen is, I even heard a pastor one time say, all of the 10 commandments still apply to us except for the one about the Sabbath. That one is gone now. But I would go to Hebrews chapter 4, and I'm going to read verses 9 through 11. And it says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. To me, that seems pretty clear.
That's in the New Testament.
There remains then,
remains.
yeah. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest must also rest from their works, just as God did from his.
Mm.
Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. So,
Wait, remain in that rest. So what doesn't happen?
well, let's do verse 10 before we do verse
Sure.
11.
Okay, sorry.
Anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. This is clearly talking about taking a break,
Mhm.
Yep.
Right.
And I think also from other places, spending time with God.
Right.
The Sabbaths, there were religious things they're supposed to do, and they'd have parties and they would have worship services and stuff. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. So this is, going back to the Old Testament
Right.
and the failures of people back then. And, I don't know exactly how to tie all of that together, but we don't want to fail to take that time to rest and end up with a bad consequence.
Right. Well, he almost says, like, what happens if you don't rest?
Yeah.
Like,
So
he's giving examples so that people don't perish.
Yeah. Let us make every effort to enter that rest, so that no
Every
one will
effort.
perish by following their example of disobedience.
Right.
So this is important,
Right.
and it's a little weird that people feel like God is threatening them with, you better take care of yourself, or I'm going to get you,
Right.
like we need to make sure that we actually are following the directions of God with the expectation that he's actually going to take care of us, that it's actually a good thing, and that we're better off.
Right.
Right.
So,
And like, to the chores, I would say, just realize that every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. And every
Yeah,
time you say no to something, you say yes to something else.
Yep.
And so I would advise people on their Sabbath to have that be a day where it's okay to say no
Mm-hmm.
to something, so that you can say yes to rest, or say yes to rest so you can say no to something else. But like maybe, that means doing chores, like folding laundry or something like that. But if you're on that day and you're like, man, I just don't want to do laundry.
Right.
I don't want to do chores.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Granted,
Oh, yeah.
like, get the chores done, maybe a different day, but like,
oh, for sure.
like, take that day and realize that tomorrow they'll still be there.
Yep.
And it's
Rest.
go ahead and look in your own heart. What does it mean to rest?
Right.
It's going to look different from one person to the other,
100%.
That's
That's why I need to fish one time a week.
yeah.
I'm
And
just kidding.
I think what the scriptures are warning us about, and what maybe you're getting at, is you don't want stuff to bleed into your Sabbath, and then all of a sudden you're not really doing it.
Yep.
I think it was just off on the side. We were talking about fasting and how there's a difference between fasting and just not eating.
Yep.
You
You fast without praying, you are what?
you're just starving.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's no point to it other than
Right.
losing weight, maybe.
And so what we don't want to do is technically have a Sabbath, but it's not restful in building our connection with God.
No,
Right.
have a Sabbath. Do it right.
Just go ahead and have one. Right. It's going to work out good. All right. So that is this episode of Chasing Squirrels with Pastor Mike, talking about the Sabbath rest and why why Jesus would irritate the religious establishment by putting mud in somebody's eyes. And it's because sometimes the religious establishment needs to be shaken up a little bit.
And also because the Sabbath is important.
Very important, super important. So good stuff. God bless. Have a wonderful day from all of us here at Chasing Squirrels.